All right. Please just join me in prayer as we just seek our Father's message today. So, Father God, we just thank you again for continuing to be in our lives, continuing to guide us, continuing to just draw us near in the good times, in the tough times. God, you never waver. And so we just pray that we're able to see you throughout all the things that happen in our life. We just continue to pray that we're able to see things how you see them and continue to see your plans, how you're building us up, how you're strengthening our faith in Jesus, and how you're using everything to ensure that we have eternity with you. And so we just thank you for opportunities to reflect on all that you're doing in our lives, having chances to celebrate with family, being thankful together. We just thank you for even opportunities to even fight with family, to have passion. God, we just thank you that we have people in our lives that are there no matter what. And so we just pray, God, that our time together over this holiday, it'll draw us closer to you, that we'll be able to stay safe, healthy as everybody might be traveling. As obviously there's a lot of danger in that. But God, we just put everything in your hands and just pray that we're really able to have our faith strengthened through this season and through this holiday. And so we just pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. I had my whole tone set. Kevin, man, you guys bring me back a little bit. But I appreciate you sharing. Because this is where, as we're going to read through these verses, it's important to understand what it really means to be thankful as a Christian. And what does that mean through all the situations, right? All the things that we go through. It's not a simple, hey, I should be thankful, or I should be able to see the good in it. There's really this need to see Jesus for all of it, right? Everything that we go through, all the things. It's like without him, I don't know how anybody can go through what this life brings, right? And so it's important as Christians to understand what Christ has done and how he continues to lead that action to continue to influence us going forward, right? Every single day. And so that's what we're going to look at today. So I have the handout there. We're looking at Colossians chapter 2, verses 6 through 7. So it's on the handout. It says, you can read it with me. It says, therefore, as you receive Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk in him, rooted and built up in him, and established in the faith, just as you were taught, abounding in thanksgiving. All right, so in this ending, it talks about abounding in thanksgiving. Do you feel like every Christian is abounding in thanksgiving? What do you guys think? Yes? No? A lot of head shaking? All right. And so when we see this scripture and we see that Paul is saying that this is possible, if we're not there, then this is really where we must look and say, how do I get there? Right? He puts a lot of clues in this text that we're going to break down. But really, our goal for today is how are we abounding in thanksgiving to God? So it's kind of funny to give the message for Thanksgiving. I'm always a pretty crazy dude. Most people have thought I'm pretty psycho based on the way I'm always thankful to God. So in some of the weirdest ways, I'm always like, hey, this must have been God, or I love how God did this and did that. And so most people are like, that's just not normal. But for me, I've always been raised with that understanding where God said, all things work out for good for those that love him. Right? So with that understanding, I was like, yeah, there's going to be a lot of things that will be tough, but knowing God's going to be able to use it for my good, as long as I keep that in mind, then I'll be able to find a way forward and find a way to be thankful for it. Even as a kid, I used to play baseball. Right? I was an all-star catcher. I played all my childhood. I was very great on defense, but I was a terrible hitter. Right? I could not see the ball. I could not get hits. So my dad used to work on me. You know, it's very frustrating to be striking out. Right? I don't know if anybody's ever played baseball. But when you strike out, it sucks, and you can't help your team. And so I would tell my dad, like, I really want to help my team. Like, how come I can't hit? And so he took me to the batting cages, all these things, trying to help me get better at hitting. But none of it worked. I just couldn't see that ball to hit it. And so my dad, he's crazy too, right? He was like, hey, his idea was pretty out there. He was like, there's actually this baseball player. His name's Pete Rose. He was a famous player from the 1970s. His nickname was Charlie Hustle. What this guy would do is actually he would lean over the plate and try to get hit by the ball. Right? So he's like, I'm going to either get a hit or get hit by the ball. And so this guy ended up becoming like one of the top baseball players of all time. But that was his strategy, right? He was always like, I'll take some pain for the team, get on base, and we'll win. And so that was my dad's advice to me. Hey, just go up there and try to get hit, right? And so that's what I did. I would just lean over the plate, try to get hit, and I'd just get hit hundreds of times. And so I was very fast, so when I got on base, I could steal a couple bases. My friend that was that hit behind me, he was a great hitter. So he would give me 1 or 2 pitches to steal the bases, then he would just knock me in. And so that was like our strategy to win games. Me and him would just be doing this. So I didn't really hit, but I had so many runs scored and stolen bases. That's how I made it to the All-Stars. And so my mom always was worried about it. She'd always seen me get hit. I was super small as a kid. And so she was out, mothers out there kind of worrying a lot. And so she was always mad at my dad. Like, why would you tell him that advice? You're just having your son get hit over and over with baseballs. And so he was like, he's happy though, right? He was miserable striking out and losing, so he wanted to win. I told him how to do it. And so for years I did this, and so at the very end of my baseball career, I ended up realizing that I needed glasses. My parents finally got some medical coverage. We actually got to see doctors and stuff like that. So the doctors realized I'm blind, right? So they're like, the reason why I can't see the baseball is because I needed glasses. And so in that moment, I was like, what the heck? Like, this is pretty shocking. And so at first I was like, should I be mad at my dad? Because he gave me the worst advice in some ways, where he just told me to get hit over and over. He didn't think to actually try to help me and see, I can't see the ball. That didn't click in my dad's head, hey, maybe I should check his eyesight. He was like, well, he can't hit, he might as well get hit. And so as I'm thinking about that, I'm like, man, my dad did not, I was like, is that good advice? And then I kind of remember these scriptures, right? It's like, no, my dad taught me, God said all things work out for my good. So I was actually happy. I was like, you know what? I'm glad I got hit by all those balls, because it actually proved how tough I was, right? In my mind, I had now this confidence built up. I was like, I'm indestructible. Like most kids are always trying to dodge the ball. They're always afraid to get hit. And I was the one leaning into it, trying to get hit over and over, right? So I was happy about myself. But it was like all these scriptures that my dad taught me, I was using it, where it's like sometimes you got to suffer for good, right? Sometimes the pain, sometimes we think we're never going to have any pain. But it was like sometimes you just got to choose the lesser pain. That's the better way. And so that's where I was like, striking out, that was hurtful. I chose a way that hurt me, but I suffered less, right? So I was using all these things, trying to put these scriptures together. And then even my dad, I was happy that he gave me that advice, because I was like, I can take anything to my dad and he'll find a way to help me. I mean, he might come up with some crazy ideas, but it worked, right? His strategy helped me become an all-star. He helped me enjoy baseball more, right? I probably would have quit if I never learned how to hit. If I didn't get that, I would have gave up on something that I did love playing. So that's where I was kind of like, I just kept looking at all these levels of thankfulness where it's like, yeah, the way God is using everything, in some ways, He can just keep fueling you, right? It's just how your perspective, how you look at it, how you're understanding how it's going to build you up. And so that's what we're going to try to look at, because it's not that we're just supposed to be thankful people. We must be people abounding in thanksgiving. Does that make sense? That's where Christians are supposed to be. I put the jacket on. I call this my Kevin jacket, the flashy style. I'm trying to get him to take me to go shopping so I can get some style. But that's where it was like all the words of the scripture, right? Psalm 23, I read all over it, where it was kind of like, that's one of my favorite scriptures. But it was like God's words are always on me. His teachings, His love, it's like I wear it, right? Most people don't have to ask if I'm thankful. They can tell I'm a pretty thankful dude. And that's what we're talking about. Like Christians are supposed to be at this level. And so that's what we're going to try to get to, because it's really a command here. When Paul is writing this, he's not just saying, hey, you should be thankful. I think this would be a good idea. He's not saying, hey, I'm a person that's abounding in thanksgiving. I'm special, look up to me. He's saying, no, I'm like you. Read all his writings. I'm like everybody else. I was a sinner. I did all these mistakes. And Christ is the reason I can withstand all these things. Christ is the reason why I'm thankful in every circumstance. Christ is the reason why when I'm weak, I'm strong. Look at Paul's writing. He keeps talking about that, where it's like the strength of his relationship with Christ is what makes him do all these things, right? So that's where in this verse, if you get a chance to look at the whole chapter of Colossians, even the whole book, it's very good. But this is where it's basically starting this whole new life in Christ, right? The whole section is like, how are you supposed to live as new people with Christ? And this is how he's starting it, like be rooted, right? Be rooted in Christ, and this is what's going to set it up. And so that's what we're going to look at, right? The principle, because we need to be abounding in thanksgiving. The first principle is that it starts with Christ being the foundation in our lives. So in this word, when we're talking about roots, right? There's a lot of images that they use for Christ. He's the foundation. He's the cornerstone. He's the first block. The roots, right? Anytime you grow a tree, it starts with a seed and it just grows and it grows down, right? So it's really, Paul's really trying to emphasize that it all begins with Christ. Most of the time we want to think about it's on us, or we came to Christ, we're the ones that put faith in Him, but He's the one that did everything first. Does that make sense? That's why you see a lot of verses. He's the starter. He's the finisher of our faith. God knew us in our womb. He knew all these things. So when we're understanding that God had all this plan all along, I think we've been covering like predestination in Romans, things like that, where it's like this is all what it's all built upon. Where it's like this idea that God is the root of everybody's life. He's the source of it. He's the beginning. And how they seek Him is how they're going to grow, right? Because when you really understand roots, they start they go down under the ground, right? Most of the stuff is happening under the surface, and at some point they end up growing. And so what Paul's trying to remind people is like, if your foundation is based on you, then you will never have this level of thanksgiving, right? Because think about it. You're going to fail. You're going to get tired. You're going to make mistakes. You're not going to be able to know what to do sometimes. And so if your foundation of your happiness, your thankfulness is on you, then let's be honest. How many of us would trust ourselves with our thankfulness, our happiness, right? That's why most of us seek counsel. Most of us try to find people that are successful in our fields, all kinds of things, right? Because we know we can't do it on our own. And so it is good to look at different resources, different people, but the main person, the main thing that we should always look at is Christ. That foundation must be in him. So if you're not abounding in thanksgiving, that's step one, right? Is your roots truly in Christ? If it's not, the rest of the practical applications that we come through will just be temporary fixes, right? If your life is not dedicated to saying, I need my roots to go deep as possible to Christ, then I will always be knocked over, right? If you ever study trees and storms and all the other stuff, like the root system is what helps them survive all the things. Trees are actually pretty cool. If you actually know the root system, when they go underground, the roots know how to go sense for water. Have you guys ever seen that? Right? That's why there's a lot of imageries of Christ being the water. Nobody thirsts, all these type of things. And so that's where it was kind of like, if you know Christ is the source, if you're that tree, you're growing your roots, you're going to keep growing towards him. Does that make sense? And so that's where it was like, if you really want to be abounding in thanksgiving, then you must start with, is he my foundation? Is he the first thing I think about? Is he going to be the last thing I think about? So once you know he's your foundation, we must learn to have a heavenly perspective on every event that happens to us. Because if he's the foundation, he's the one that's guarding our life and leading it, then ultimately he's going to be the one that leads it forward, right? So if we look at it from our perspective, most of the time it's going to be temporary. How is this affecting me today? How is it going to affect me tomorrow? How is it going to affect me in a couple years? Jesus is looking at it as like, how is this going to affect them for eternity? Right? That's where we're talking about. Like his perspective is not just, oh, I want them to be happy today. He wants you to be happy today, tomorrow, 1 year, 10 years, 70 years, 90 years, 100 years, 120. That's what they say the max is. And then the eternity in heaven. Does that make sense? So if he's your foundation, he now sets your perspective. Because that's where when you talk about the buildings, the cornerstone, that's what it's all about. When you put a cornerstone down for a building's foundation, that sets the path in which way the building's going to be built. Right? So that's where it was like, if he's the source, he's the start, everything will now be based on him. And so if he's your foundation, then you must say, everything that happens in my life, I must now look at from a heavenly perspective. Now, this is not easy. This is the hardest part because, like I said, we don't see the vision. We don't always hear his answers right away. But it's important and it's something to work on. And thankfully, Jesus is the one that helps us with it. And so for me, probably one of the harder times, I lost somebody a couple years ago, about 4 years ago. I appreciate you sharing, Kevin. But I lost basically my second dad 4 years ago, right before Veterans Day. He was killed in a car crash. So 4 years ago, I was having a tough time through ministry too, so it's kind of, the timing of it was pretty rough. But basically, I knew this guy ever since I was a freshman in high school, right before I started high school. He knew me and my best friend, right? He was always with us, taught us sports. He even helped me in baseball, wrestling, all kinds of stuff. So he was there for me when I was first going through high school. When I left for the Army, this guy, his name was Junior, right? He was always there for me. He was always cheering me on. Every time I came home, he would barbecue, right? He was like, I'm going to barbecue all these meats for Joaquin. I know he loves to eat. He would make this special thing called tri-tip, and so he made it the best way, right? And so every time when I would show up to his house, he'd be throwing parties. He'd be like, everybody stand aside. Joaquin's going to get his plate first, right? I want him to get as much meat. And so his goal was to help make home as great as possible, right? Because he was like, I know he's going to be going through some crazy things. He's going to see some stuff. I want him to fight harder because he knows how great home is, right? So that was his attitude. He was the guy that just did everything for me. Even when I started ministry, he was there for me when I tried to restart my life, right, come out. He was there trying to encourage me. When I first started with children and youth, I did not think that was my calling, right? I saw some doors opening. So I was talking to him. I was like, hey, man, I see this thing happening. I was like, but I'm too crazy. Like, I've done too much stuff, right? So he was like, I was like, there's no way I could be a youth pastor. And so he was like, are you kidding me? He's like, I've seen you grow up your whole life. He's like, you're definitely a good kid. And he's like, more importantly, our grandkids love you, right? My friends, they were 5 and 7 now. He was like, they love you. They always want to play with you. They're excited. He was like, they know you have a pure heart. And they don't see you as somebody that, is this crazy monster. He's like, they just see you as this big old kid that just likes to have fun. And so he was the one that was like, I can see God calling you to do this. And so he was like, go for it, right? God opened that door. He's going to help you through it. And so he was very foundational for my whole life. So as a couple years ago, me and him, we started making plans. He was getting ready to retire. One night he was leaving. He worked in Livermore Labs, right? So he was driving from Livermore Labs out to Brentwood. So there's like this crazy 2-lane highway, a lot of curves. People love to speed down there. And so he left about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Most people think that's a safe time to go home. Not a lot of traffic, right? He's like, hey, this is an easy drive. And so as he was driving home, there's this 2-lane highway. So as he's going down this way, the cars on the other side, one of them was going slow, so 2 cars decided to race and go around him. Right? So one vehicle went on the side of the road, and one went into the other lane. And so as they sped, going 100 miles, I think it was like almost 110, as they sped down trying to pass this car, they came around to the curve, and they ended up T-boning my friend's dad. So as soon as they didn't T-bone him, he hit him head on. Right? So as soon as he hit the car head on, his car turned to the side, and then the car behind him T-boned him because he couldn't stop. Right? It was just too fast of an accident. So my friend's dad got crushed from 2 cars right at once. So his car was crumpled. His whole body, his whole left side was damaged. So they had to evacuate him in a helicopter. And so they took him to the hospital in Walnut Creek. So his brain activity was 0 at the time. But my friend called me up. He's like, hey man, my dad's on his deathbed, right? So he's like, you want to come? So I went to the hospital. I was there trying to be there for the family. And so he was like, you want to say goodbye, right? We're going to pull the plug in a couple minutes. And so when I went to try to go into his hospital room, I actually froze when I saw his body. And so I've seen a lot of people die. I've seen people shot, burned, blown up. I put them in bags, moved them off and stuff like that. It didn't bother me. It was part of my job, right? And so now that I left the military, I was kind of like, well, death is not as immediate like as it used to be, right? So I kind of let my guard down thinking people can just die at any moment. And so when I saw his body, I froze. I didn't know what to do. Now was the most meaningful person that I saw die. And I just couldn't even walk in to say anything to him, right? I was so surprised by this death. And so my friend, he came, he talked to me. He's like, no, man, it's cool. It's not disrespect, just take your time. So, I was able to say goodbye to my friend's dad, right, Junior. And so, obviously, a couple of days later, we're at the funeral, and we're trying to talk, around. My buddy's kind of asking, why would God let this happen? And so he knows I'm a pastor. He knows this is my life. I've seen a lot of death, and so obviously my perspective's a little different. But how do I minister to him? How do I even say it? Because now this one hits home. And so as we're talking, I knew my friend's dad's life story. So about 20 years ago, he actually got into a work accident where his leg got messed up, so they had to take him to the hospital, and they did all kinds of x-rays. And so when they took him to get these x-rays, they actually discovered he had a heart defect. And so the dad was actually feeling bad for a couple months. He just didn't go to the doctor, right? So he just thought he could get over it. And so luckily this workplace accident actually is what saved his life, right? Because they caught it in time, they were able to fix it, and so his dad got 20 more years. And so, at first, even for his dad, when he got hurt, he was like, man, I'm not gonna be able to work for months, how am I gonna put food on my table? How am I gonna be able to support my kids, right? His initial response to that accident was like, man, why did this happen, right? Life's gonna be tough. Little did he know that would be actually what saved his life and gave him 20 more years. Does that make sense? So that's what we talk about, these perspectives, things that happen, we're not really seeing it in the fullest. And so for him, he got to live these 20 years. I met him right afterwards. And so me and him, that's what we bonded on, right? God saved my life as a kid. He was talking about how God saved his life through that accident. And so we had a great bond. And so when I was talking to my friend, I was like, your dad always said he was living on borrowed time. Where it was kind of like, he could have died years ago, nobody would have known, right? And so he was like, but God gave him these extra 20 years. He got to see his sons graduate, his daughter graduate. 2 of them got married, they had grandkids, right? So it's like he got to live, and God gave him all these extra blessings for 20 years. And so I was like, yes, it's tough that he's gone now, but it was like, we should celebrate what we got with him, right? Because I was like, I know for me, if I never met him, I don't know what my life would have turned out like. Does that make sense? And so I was like, it's hard to be sad right now just because of the fact that God gave us 20 years with him. And so, as we've talked through that grief, as we continue to work through it, there's moments that we're sad about it, obviously, because like I said, the first 3 years they didn't even have Thanksgiving because he died right before it. So last year was the first time they ever did the meal. I was out there with them. But for me, it was kind of like when we take these tough issues and we're trying to figure out, God, how can we see your grace in it? How can we find ways to use this grief for good? And so when I was doing ministry, when I was starting with kids, I didn't know how to barbecue, right? Like I knew how to cook a little bit. My dad knew how to cook for my family, but I never cooked for like a big group. So I told you, this guy, my whole childhood, he was always cooking for groups and people like that. So I actually went to him and asked him, how can I cook for the youth? What can I do? Right? And so he taught me for years on how to do all these things. Right? So he was the one helping me through all these different groups. And so as he taught me, now as he's gone, I was like, you know what? I was like, every time I barbecue, I'm going to remember him. Does that make sense? I was like, he always tried to pour as much love into his cooking and to make sure people were welcome, that they always felt that they had a place to just be open and share things. Right? So that's what that was his goal every time. So he put a lot of effort always into cooking. And so for me, I was like, you know what? I was like, Jesus, I thank you for all the stuff you've done and the way you serve people. I was like, I'm thankful you gave me an example to do that here on earth as well. Does that make sense? Because I can't pull 5,000 fish out like Jesus. I'm trying. That's my prayer. But you know what I mean? But that's why I was like, okay, Jesus, you did certain things, but you also inspired other people. And so I was like, I got to see you working through this man. And so I was like, now every chance I get to cook, I'm going to do exactly what he did. Does that make sense? So I got a chance to really honor his memory every single time. Most of you taste my cooking, you can see, you can thank Junior, right? He's the one that taught me how to do that. And so that's why I said, like, to me, God gave me a chance to really use that for positive. It helps me serve people, helps me love people better. But when we're talking about, obviously that helps me now, but there's still grief that comes through the situation. But the Christ is my foundation. That was the first step. And so understanding the heavenly perspective, my friend Junior is in heaven, right? And so, yes, we're temporarily separated, but because of Christ, I will see him again. Does that make sense? So, yes, we're temporarily separated, but because Christ is my foundation, it's his foundation, we get to see each other. So my vision of heaven when I first get there, I'm going to see him barbecuing. He's going to have a little tri-tip on the grill. And he's going to be like, Joaquin, I've been waiting for you. I've been waiting for you to taste this. I know you haven't had it in a long time. I'm like, woo! Right? And so when I mean that tri-tip, he's going to be like, I got a grill right next to you. I see you've been doing some stuff down there too. Let me see what you got. Right? And so I imagine just grilling with my friend Junior in heaven, and then Jesus is going to come over and be like, I smelled that meat. I was like, I know you guys must have been reunited. You know what I mean? He's going to be like, all right. Right? He's like, let me see. And so as we're all there bonding, having a good time, you know, Jesus is going to be like, what do you want to know, Joaquin? What's your first question? I'll be like, when you fed the 5,000, what'd that fish taste like? And I imagine Jesus just popping the fish out. And he's going to be like, here, try it for yourself. And I'm going to be like, this is the perfectly seasoned, perfectly cooked. I was like, Jesus put love into that fish. He did not just make a quick fish to feed people. He poured the love in. He's the one that inspired my friend to do that. He's the one that inspires me to do that. Does that make sense? And so that's why I said, it's still tough. Obviously, I want to be with him. But that's what we said. Jesus is the foundation. He's the one securing eternity. And so, yes, we're separated. But the joy of everything, the way I'm able to be thankful for the 18 years I got with him, right, is because of God. Right? So me and my friend, you know, we've gone closer to this. It's kind of crazy. Like, even though I came back from the Army, I was probably more friends with his dad than my friend, because my friend's he was kind of wild at first, right? I was trying to be a pastor, and so he wasn't really doing the things that would help me become a good pastor, right? So I had to kind of distance myself. But I always go see my friend's dad, and so after this, obviously my friend, you know, he changed his life. He knew that he wanted to be the rock for his family, like his dad was, right? That's what we talked about. Like, how is he going to be able to honor his dad's memory? And so as he's become the rock, he's trying to lead for his kids. He's trying to teach them all this stuff. You know, he's trying to teach them about God, things like that. You know, that's where me and him are able to grow closer, right? So that's what I said. It doesn't take away the pain. It doesn't take away those moments of sadness, right? But that's where it was like, but a heavenly perspective changes everything that happens in our lives. Does that make sense? And so hopefully for you guys, that's your goal. How will this help me for eternity? And if you start thinking about that, then you're going to then say, I can't figure that out. I'm going to go to Christ. And that's what the step 3 is. It all depends on Christ to make this happen. If you don't feel it, call out to him, read his words, study his actions, and spend time with him. For the most part, when things are going great, how often do we seek out Christ? What do you guys think? Right? When you're like, hey, I got this opportunity to go to the school I wanted to. Is your first step to be like, Christ, should I go? Or you're like, finally, I got it. I'm going, because that's what I want. Does that make sense? There's nothing wrong with that. You can pray later. Some people, you know, there's nothing wrong with celebrating at first, but remembering that, hey, Christ, is this what's important? But that's where so many of us, like I said, it's so easy to get in our successes, in our happiness, we're like, we don't need Christ. We're not looking for him. And so when we're like that, obviously, when the hard times come, there's a reason why it's so hard to be thankful right away. Because we haven't built up our relationship with him to be thankful as soon as possible. Does that make sense? That's where it was kind of like, because we're always like, oh, everything's good. I must be doing something right because he's giving me everything. And so that's where I was like, well, what does the heavenly perspective say about that? What does Christ said about that? That's not always true, right? A lot of times you're doing the wrong things, and yes, you're getting built up, but in some ways you're going to fall. Does that make sense? There's people that cheat in business, people that cut corners, they try to make money. Yeah, they're successful for a little bit. They're getting their houses, cars, whatever they want. But as soon as they get caught, bam, it's all gone in an instant, and it's even harder to get back. Does that make sense? And that's where it was like, were they looking for God in that stuff when they were making their own happiness happen? Probably not. And so this is where hopefully you guys really understand. It depends on Christ. He's the foundation. He's the source. He's the food. He's going to be the one that continues to give us a heavenly perspective. And so I appreciate what Kevin was saying, where he was like, you don't feel it all the time. You don't have that passion. This is where Christ, if you keep reading his words, that's why I put it in the read his words. He understands that. He understands that it's going to take you time. He understands it's going to take you time to figure it out or walk your own path, come back. Right? Why does he have all these stories of the prodigal son, all these people, forgiveness, the ungrateful servant, all this stuff? Like he's continuing to show you that, yes, people are going to take time. People are going to make mistakes. He's like, but I'm the one that's always going to be there for them. Right? So it's like, I'm always waiting to go after them. I'm waiting for the 1 out of the 100, right? Then I'll leave the 99. Like he keeps giving every single image to help you understand. He's like, he's waiting to help you through this process. Because that's what we said. If your foundation is built on something besides him, when you go through the hard times and you don't look for him, or you only look to him for answers like the way you want it, you're really not understanding who he is. Does that make sense? Because even Christ said, are you going to suffer like he does? He says that, yeah. Right? Because if you ever try to help somebody in need, are they always receptive of it, thankful for it, or sometimes do they get angry? Why are you pitying me? Or why do you think I need it? Like there's so many ways. And so that's where I said, like, even if you understand Christ, he's your foundation. He literally tells you when you do right, sometimes you will suffer. But you abound in thanksgiving because you know that you're breaking down their barriers so that they can have eternity. Does that make sense? That's basically what Christ says. Keep loving them the way I did to break it down so that they can have eternity. So be thankful that they're rejecting you because over time, you're going to wear them down with love. Does that make sense? So that's why I said, like, if you really understand his words, his actions, it's going to give you that perspective. And so one of the things I put for applications is to rest, right? One of the first things you need to do is take rest to be with God and spend time with Jesus. And so this is where the funniest thing where we talk about having a heavenly perspective. How many of you, if I told you you need to take 24 hours off this week, every week, would you be happy about that? Or would you be frustrated by that? Who would be happy about, I said you have to take 24 hours off? A couple people, I know some parents got their hand up, yeah. That's right? Maybe half of you are saying, yeah, I would love to have 24 hours off. Why is not everybody doing that? Because you're like, I probably got deadlines, I have things to do, I need to stay moving forward, productive, otherwise I'm not going to get what I want. Does that make sense? So even when God put rest in his plan for us to be able to be rejuvenated and be happier, have more joy, as soon as we have to practice it, we're miserable about it. Does that make sense? Think about that when we talk about that. What is even your own perspective of rest to have more of Christ in your life? You don't even want to do it because you know it's going to hurt your future success. Does that make sense? And that's what we say. Like if that's your initial understanding, then that's where you can understand. Hey, one of my roots is off, because if spending time with Jesus to be rejuvenated by him is a tough part of my life, then I'm missing out on the most important thing. Does that make sense? Because in reality, most of what you're looking at is a temporary problem or a temporary, hey, I need to get into this school, I need to get into this job. Now, I'm not saying you don't need to do all those things, right? Obviously, they're important. But the proper balance. Does that make sense? If every single thing is determining like what school you go to, all those type of things, it was like you're cutting Jesus out of your life. You're cutting him out of guiding you to the places, guiding you to the future, all this kind of stuff. And so it's like, of course you won't be abounding in thanksgiving because he's not able to give you the perspective that you need. And that's why a lot of people burn out at 30, 40. Some people burn out in college, right? You see a lot of people leave at 20, 21. Why? Because they've pushed it so hard, they don't have the perspective, and it ain't worth it no more. And so that's what we're saying. Like, if Jesus is telling you, I'm going to be the reason why you're thankful for all of it, right? Because even, I won't get into that. I'm going to get stoned by some parents. All right, but so that's what we talk about. Because even for kids, right? So even this perspective, we were talking about this with the older youth. Whereas like even going to college is a burden in itself, right? We're like, man, I got so much work to do. I got to do all these college apps, all kinds of stuff. It's competitive. And so we're like, yes, from an earthly perspective, it is actually one of the more burdensome things. But we were like, how many people in the world actually get to go to college? Right? Anybody know? What's the percentage of kids that get to go? My older group knows. What's the percentage? What do you guys think? Any shout outs? Huh? 30? All right, according to the genius back there, it is 7%. Chris saying, I trust his numbers. I told him I won't verify it. But he was talking about 7% of the kids in the world don't have a chance to go to college. If you think about it, right, think about all the poor countries, India, Brazil, all these bigger countries, like most of their kids never get educated. Does that make sense? So that's where it was kind of like, from a heavenly perspective, the fact that you get to go to school every single day and get, advance your brains, advance your skills, that's one of the greatest gifts that you have. And yet, for the most part, most of us look at that as one of the most burdensome gifts. Does that make sense? And so that's what we said. Think about that. People that, even for jobs, right? When people had to work from remote or all this other stuff, it was like, how many countries do people get to choose their job? How many people get to choose how many hours they work? How many people get to choose whether they're going to go to their kids' events, all kinds of stuff? And it was like, most countries do not. Right? A lot of countries have the dictatorships where you do exactly what they tell you to do. That makes sense? You want to talk about wasted gifts or you're not able to do what you want? That's what it's like in other places. Does that make sense? So that's what we're talking about. Like, if you think about a perspective, it's so easy to get caught up in what you see now or what other people are doing around you and not be thankful. But it was like, but when you speak with Christ and you start understanding, he's like, are you serious? Jesus is more soft than I am. He'll be like, come on, school's good, right? I'm like, come on, are you serious? Like, that's what we talk about. Like, in reality, think about the perspective of what you get, right? The freedoms, the ability to choose all these things. We talk about even divorce rates, all this stuff. Like, divorce rate's pretty high. And it was like, in the past, people couldn't even choose their significant others. It was arranged marriages for almost everybody, right? And so it's like, look how we've handled that freedom now. And so it's like, but most people are like, they dread the system, or I don't want to get married. Like, everybody has these different things. And it was kind of like, don't you find it funny that people couldn't even choose for the longest time? There's still people in this world that cannot choose who they want to marry. Does that make sense? And so that's why we said, like, I hope you don't take it where it's like, man, I should feel bad about the way I think. No. What we should do is say, hey, the way I think, it robs me of the joy of a lot of the blessings that I have in my life. And so I need to see how Christ sees it so that I can truly be thankful all the time. Does that make sense? If I can see it the way Christ sees it, then I will be abounding in thanksgiving the way he did. Right? And so that's why I said, Jesus is not going to wave a magical wand and say, hey, here's all the knowledge. Even though you didn't spend no time with me, you didn't rest or anything. That's not how he works. Because he even laid out a groundwork in his life. What did he do when he needed rejuvenation? He went off to the side and sought the Father. That makes sense? He's the one telling you, your foundation's in me, follow what I did. Even though I had all this work to do, I'm doing all this miraculous stuff, and yes, there's still people hurting, I needed to make sure I was refreshed. I needed to make sure I was with my Father to ensure I'm thankful, that I have the right attitude going out there. Does that make sense? He kept going back to God. Remind me of the vision. These people are making me crazy. Right? He's like, these people are not. I was like, you really think they're going to do it? Like, I can see him in God's discussions. Right, where it's like, man, but that's where they're, like I said, they're together. Like, no, we know, heavenly perspective, eternal perspective, all this is going to work. Right, when you sacrifice your life, that's what's going to change everything. Right, so that's what we see, Jesus being rejuvenated and spending that time with God, even though there was work to be done. And so for every one of you, I don't know if you can get to 24 hours. That's between you and God, but start putting more and more time to spend with God. Does that make sense? Get to that 24-hour period. Be more diligent in your 6 days to be able to get to that point. Does that make sense? There are people that, if you really understand God's people throughout the Bible, they were farmers. They had to work every single day. Right? If you ever grew crops, plants, things like that, you have to work on and feed animals all the time. But for them to take 24 hours, it was a big sacrifice. But why did they do it? Because they just came out of being slaves in Egypt and never had a day off. Does that make sense? You think they were like, hey, slaves, you want a day off? Sure. No, right? They're like, we want you 7 days a week. When you die, we'll replace you with another slave. Does that make sense? So that's what we said. When God gave the day of Sabbath back to his people when they were free, they enjoyed it. right? I was reading a book, it's for pastors, but it was like, he's reminding us of like how Jews treat the Sabbath day, like how sacred it is. Where they're like, they make sure everything is set apart. They have all these rules to help protect that they don't do anything during a 24-hour period. Does that make sense? They want to make sure everything that they do is holy and something that will bring them closer to God. Doesn't mean you have to sit there for the Bible and read it 24 hours a day. That's not what we're talking about, right? But being able to rest your mind, being able to then listen to him. All right? And so, like I said, work on that time to make rest a priority in your schedule. And then, like I said, use that time to spend on Jesus. The root system must be fed and it must go down. Right? If you really want to weather all things, then you must be closer to him. Does that make sense? The Bible characters are a perfect example of that. Where it's like they got to see him for 3 years doing all these type of things. So the challenges that they would face after it, they were ready. That makes sense? They were ready. They were thankful. They were able to keep reaching out to people. And it only comes from spending that time with him. And so so like I said, it's Jesus first, right? And so from there, list out all the things that you are thankful for to Jesus for. The youth got to do some stuff put on the board right there. I went out last week to Monterey to do this. But basically, I try to list every single thing I'm thankful for, and I ran out of time because it was a long list. But I try to thank God for every little thing. I was like, I'm thankful for my dad's gift of fighting. I'm thankful for my mom's athletic ability. Like I just kept putting everything together. I put down how they were even brought together, the situations, how God put me together in the womb. My mom had one miscarriage. Right? I was like, God, thank you for ensuring I was not that one. Right? So I just kept listing it over and over. I'm thankful that I'm born in a country that had medical coverage. I'm thankful that I was able to go to the hospital when I was sick. Right? I just kept going over and over. And I was like, dang, my hand's hurting. Right? Like I don't write like that no more. But it was like, I was like, I still got to keep working on it. And that's what I said. When you really want to get this heavenly perspective, write down every little thing. Really write it down where it's like, what has God given me? Right? Because most of us will probably, if we gave a quick rush, we probably write 10 to 20 things I'm thankful for. If I really sat you down for 24 hours to think about it, and somebody was challenging your perspectives, family members, like, oh, you should be thankful for this. Right? They could add so much, we'd probably be in the thousands. And so that's why I said, spend that time with God writing every single thing down. Right? We have these a couple of days off for the holiday. If you really want to be abounding in Thanksgiving, let God lead that perspective back to everything he's given you. Does that make sense? Because that's what I said. It should be a very heartwarming moment where you're like, man, I've missed so many little things, God, that you've done. I've just taken it for granted. Thank you for giving it to me anyways. Thank you for keeping it in my life. Help me then cherish it even more. Does that make sense? And you should be able to just keep writing and writing. And so maybe we share lists in the future. All right, and so as you're going through this, the last step is pray to help from Jesus to be thankful and to be abounding in thanksgiving. It is not something that you can do on your own. Does that make sense? It is not meant to be something that you do on your own. It is meant to be this process that brings you closer to Christ. Because with him, this is possible. Does that make sense? So that's why I said we can go through a lot of lists of things where people are like, there's no way I can forgive people. There's no way I can get over this. And it was like, that's true. But from a heavenly perspective, and over time, Jesus can change that. Right? And there's been a lot of people, if you ever read testimonies from people out of World War II, people, sexual assault survivors, all kinds of stuff. It's like their testimonies, their things, it's very powerful. They get raw, yes. But when you see how they grew to be closer to Jesus through everything, it for sure, they're going to be in heaven with them. Everything that happened is going to be gone. Does that make sense? And it's like, yes, we wish those things never happened to people. But when God can use it to make sure everybody has eternity, everybody is free from this stuff for the rest of their lives, then it's like, we get it. That makes sense. We get it where he doesn't want it to happen, but for many of us, we're so stubborn, or so many of us want what we want until we see the right way to do things. And he's graceful for those people. He's patient with those people. And that's why we're thankful as well. Because even for me, like I said, I'm only thankful because of God. He took a long time and I stretched him, but he did not give up. Right? So that's why I said, why am I always thankful and abounding in it? Because there's no way I could be here without Jesus. I could not be here without him drawing me, him leading the process, him saying no way. Jacob wrestled with the angel of Jesus was even tougher on me. All right, and I'm thankful for that. That's why I said, if you really want to have him, then it's on you to really see him in your life, right? And go after it. Find ways to do it. Because, like we said, this is a command. And the only way we're really going to be able to live with that abundance of thanksgiving, the only way we're really going to be able to show people why Jesus' love is superior to everything on this earth is because of what he does in our hearts. All right? So please just join me in prayer as we close. Jesus, we just thank you again for your mercy and grace.